You must have done something to upset him, my mother said, watching me struggle to get up from the floor. The pain in my back was excruciating, but her words hurt more than any physical injury. My brother Marcus stood in the doorway, his face a mixture of anger and satisfaction. My name is Emma Collins, and at 24, I'd just experienced what would be the last time my brother would ever lay his hands on me. Though I didn't know it yet, that evening would change everything. I'd come home to help pack up my childhood home. My parents were downsizing and needed assistance sorting through years of accumulated memories. Marcus, my 28-year-old brother, had always been the golden child, despite his volatile temper and tendency toward violence. The incident started over something trivial. I'd moved some of his old sports trophies into a donation box. "These are from high school," I'd explained when he discovered them. "You haven't looked at them in years." His face had turned that familiar shade of red, the one that always preceded an explosion. Before I could react, he grabbed me by my shoulders and slammed me against the wall. The impact sent shockwaves through my spine, and I crumpled to the ground. Now, watching me writhe in pain, my mother's only concern was for Marcus's feelings. "Emma always knows how to push his buttons," she told my father, who had finally emerged from his study after hearing the commotion. I didn't. I tried to speak, but the pain made it difficult to catch my breath. "Just apologize to your brother," my father said, not even looking at me. "You know how important those trophies are to him." Marcus smirked, arms crossed. "Yeah, Emma, apologize." I'd apologized so many times over the years. For provoking him when he broke my finger at age 12. For embarrassing him when he pushed me down the stairs at 16. For annoying him when he slammed my hand in a car door at 20. Each time, my parents found a way to make it my fault. Each time, I believed them a little less. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not because I meant it, but because I knew it was the only way to end this. Marcus nodded, satisfied, and left the room. My parents followed him, probably to comfort him about how difficult his sister was. I lay there for what felt like hours, trying to find a position that didn't send lightning bolts of pain through my body. When I finally managed to stand, I knew something was seriously wrong. The pain wasn't fading like usual. If anything, it was getting worse. That night, I could barely sleep. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through my back. By morning, I couldn't get out of bed without tears streaming down my face. "Stop being dramatic," my mother said when I called her from my room. "Marcus barely touched you." But I knew this was different. Using my phone, I managed to schedule an appointment with a spine specialist for that afternoon. When I told my parents I was going to the doctor, they exchanged worried glances. "That's unnecessary," my father said quickly. "Just put some ice on it." "We don't need to involve outsiders in family matters," my mother added, her voice tight with anxiety. Their reaction only strengthened my resolve. For the first time, I saw their concern for what it was, not worry for my health, but fear of exposure. The drive to Dr. Sullivan's office was excruciating. Each bump in the road sent jolts of pain through my spine. By the time I arrived, I could barely walk upright. The nurse who took my initial assessment frowned at my pain level rating. "And this happened yesterday?" she asked, making notes in my chart. "How exactly did you sustain the injury?" I hesitated, years of conditioning making me want to protect my family, but something in her kind eyes made me tell the truth. "My brother threw me against a wall," I said quietly. "My parents said I provoked him." She paused in her writing, looking at me carefully. "This has happened before." I nodded, and for the first time in years, I felt tears forming, not from pain, but from the simple act of being believed. Dr. Sullivan, a tall woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, ordered immediate x-rays and an MRI. As I lay in the imaging machine, I thought about all the times I'd hidden bruises, made excuses, convinced myself it wasn't that bad. When Dr. Sullivan called me into her office to review the results, her expression was grave. The images on her screen showed my spine in stark detail, and even to my untrained eyes, something looked wrong. "Emma," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I need you to listen carefully. This injury didn't just happen yesterday. Your spine shows evidence of repeated trauma over many years. The latest impact has caused severe damage that requires immediate attention." I stared at the images, seeing years of abuse mapped out in my bones. "What does that mean?" "It means," Dr. Sullivan said, reaching for her phone, "that I'm legally obligated to report this. and it means you have a choice to make about your future." As she dialed, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. For years, I carried the weight of my family's secrets, believing their lies about my role in my own abuse. But now, looking at the undeniable evidence on the screen, I knew the truth was finally going to come out. The specialist's next words would set in motion a chain of events that would change my life forever. And for the first time, I was ready to let it happen. Dr. Sullivan's report set off a whirlwind of activity. Within hours, I found myself speaking with a police detective who specialized in domestic violence cases. Detective Martinez listened patiently as I recounted years of abuse, her pen moving steadily across her notepad. "Your medical records show multiple emergency room visits over the years," she said, reviewing a thick file. "Broken finger at 12, concussion at 16, crushed hand at 20. Each time, the injuries were logged as accidents." I nodded, remembering how my parents had coached me before each hospital visit. "Tell them you fell," they'd say. "Tell them you were playing sports. Don't make your brother look bad." My parents, I explained to Detective Martinez, they always said I provoked him. That if I just behaved better, Marcus wouldn't get so angry. She looked up from her notes, her eyes kind but determined. "That's what abusers want their victims to believe. But your spine specialist's report tells a different story. These injuries show a clear pattern of escalating violence." While I spoke with the detective, Dr. Sullivan arranged for me to be admitted to the hospital. The damage to my spine required immediate treatment to prevent permanent nerve damage. As the nurses settled me into my room, my phone exploded with messages from my family. "Where are you?" My mother demanded in a text. "You're causing unnecessary drama." "You better not be telling lies about your brother," my father warned. Marcus sent a single message. "You'll regret this." I turned off my phone, feeling both terrified and strangely liberated. The hospital social worker, Sarah, helped me file for an emergency protective order. "Your brother's threats, combined with the medical evidence, make this a clear case," she assured me. That evening, as I lay in my hospital bed, Detective Martinez returned with news. "We've spoken with your parents and brother," she said. "Their story is interesting." "Let me guess," I said, trying to smile despite the pain. "I'm clumsy and attention-seeking." "Actually, your brother claimed you attacked him first, and he merely defended himself. Your parents backed up his version." I closed my eyes, unsurprised but still hurt. Of course they did. "But here's the thing," Detective Martinez continued, pulling out her phone. "The spine specialist's report doesn't just show yesterday's injury, it shows years of systematic abuse. Your brother's story doesn't explain that." She showed me photos of my MRI and X-rays, pointing out old fractures, healed breaks, and accumulated trauma. "Bodies keep records," she explained, "and yours has been keeping detailed notes for years." The next morning, my Aunt Julia arrived. She was my mother's younger sister, the one who had always looked at Marcus with suspicion. "I knew something was wrong," she said, taking my hand. "I should have done more." "You couldn't have known," I assured her, but she shook her head. "I saw the signs. The way you flinched when he came near you, how you made yourself small around him. I didn't want to believe my own sister would allow this." Julia became my advocate, working with the hospital staff and police to ensure everything was properly documented. She also helped me realize something important. I wasn't alone anymore. The protective order was granted that afternoon. Marcus was legally required to stay away from me, and my parents were listed as involved parties due to their enabling behavior. The detective informed me they were investigating previous incidents as well. "Your brother's record isn't as clean as your parents pretended," Detective Martinez revealed. "There have been complaints from ex-girlfriends, co-workers, even neighbors. You're not the only one he's hurt." This information hit me hard. All those years my parents had made me feel like I was the problem. Like I was the only one who provoked Marcus's anger. But there had been others, and my parents had probably helped hide those incidents too. Sarah, the social worker, helped me develop a safety plan. Julia offered me a place to stay during my recovery, and Dr. Sullivan arranged for me to begin physical therapy once I was released from the hospital. "Your spine will heal," Dr. Sullivan assured me during her rounds. "But more importantly, you're breaking a cycle of abuse that could have continued for years." That evening, as I watched the sun set through my hospital window, I received one final text from my mother. If you drop this nonsense now, we can all forget it happened. Family should stick together. I showed the message to Detective Martinez, who added it to her evidence file. That's not how family should work, she said firmly. Real family protects you. They don't cover up abuse. Looking at the message, I finally understood something that had eluded me for years. My family hadn't been protecting me by hiding Marcus's violence. They had been protecting him, at the cost of my safety and well-being. As I drifted off to sleep that night, my back supported by medical pillows and pain managed by proper medication, I felt stronger than I had in years. The spine specialist hadn't just exposed my injuries, she had exposed the truth that my family had buried for so long. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let them bury it again. 6 months after my hospitalization, I sat in a courtroom, listening to Dr. Sullivan testify about the extent of my injuries. The prosecutor displayed my MRI images on a large screen, each mark of abuse clearly visible to the jury. These injuries, Dr. Sullivan explained, pointing to various areas of my spine, show a pattern consistent with repeated traumatic impacts over many years. The most recent injury could have resulted in permanent paralysis if left untreated. Marcus sat at the defense table, wearing a suit that couldn't hide his rage. Our parents sat behind him, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the devastated parent. But their act wasn't working anymore. The prosecution had built a strong case. After my report, other victims had come forward. 2 of Marcus's ex-girlfriends, a former coworker, and even our childhood neighbor's daughter. Each testimony revealed the same pattern of violence and intimidation that I had endured. The defendant's sister wasn't his only victim, the prosecutor stated, but she was his first, and thanks to her courage in speaking up, she will be his last. During the trial's recess, Julia squeezed my hand. "You're doing great," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." I've been living with Julia during my recovery, attending physical therapy 3 times a week. My back was healing, but more importantly, I was healing emotionally. With the help of a trauma counselor, I was finally understanding that none of the abuse had been my fault. The defense tried to paint me as unstable, attention-seeking, and prone to exaggeration, but they couldn't explain away the medical evidence or the pattern of behavior established by other victims. When my parents testified, claiming they had no idea about the abuse, the prosecutor was ready. "Mrs. Collins," she asked my mother, "how do you explain these hospital records? Each injury your daughter sustained was followed by a family vacation or expensive gift for Marcus. Were you rewarding your son for hurting your daughter?" My mother's facade cracked. "We were just trying to keep the peace," she whispered. The verdict came after 3 days of testimony, guilty on all counts. Marcus was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with mandatory anger management and psychiatric evaluation. My parents faced charges for child endangerment and obstruction of justice. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one last time. The hatred in his eyes no longer frightened me. I was stronger now, surrounded by people who actually cared about my well-being. 1 year after the trial, I stood in front of a group of domestic violence survivors, sharing my story. Detective Martinez had connected me with a support organization, and I'd found purpose in helping others recognize and escape abuse. Family loyalty shouldn't mean sacrificing your safety, I told them. Real family protects you, supports you, and never makes you feel responsible for someone else's violence. My back had healed better than expected, though some days were still challenging. But the emotional scars were healing too. I'd learned to stand tall, literally and figuratively. Julia sat in the audience, beaming with pride. She'd become more than an aunt. She was the mother figure I always needed. Through her, I learned what genuine family love looked like. My parents eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges, accepting probation and mandatory counseling. They sent a letter through their lawyer, claiming they were sorry, but I wasn't ready to forgive them. Maybe someday, but not yet. Last week, I received an unexpected email from Dr. Sullivan. She was developing a training program for medical professionals about recognizing signs of long-term abuse, and she wanted to use my case as an example. "Your story," she wrote, "could help other doctors identify and help abuse victims before it's too late. You've turned your pain into purpose." Reading her words, I thought about that day in her office, when she first showed me the truth written in my bones. She hadn't just been my doctor, She'd been the first person to stand up and say this is wrong without qualification or excuse. Today, I work with domestic violence organizations, sharing my story and helping others find their voice. My medical records are used in training sessions for healthcare providers, teaching them to look beyond the surface of accident claims. Sometimes during these sessions, I show them my first MRI, the one that exposed years of hidden abuse. Bodies keep records, I tell them, echoing Detective Martinez's words. But it's up to us to read them and take action. My brother's violence left marks on my spine that will never completely fade, but they're no longer a source of shame or secret pain. They're evidence of survival, of strength, and of the importance of speaking truth to power. The spine specialist didn't just save my back that day. By exposing the truth, she helped me save myself. And now I'm helping others do the same, one story at a time. There she goes again, turning our family home into a zoo. My mother-in-law's voice carried across the backyard as I gently lifted a trembling rescue puppy from my car. It's embarrassing enough that my son married a woman with no ambition, but now she's making us look like the neighborhood shelter. I held the scared puppy closer, trying to shield him from her harsh words. After 5 years of marriage to her son David, I'd grown accustomed to Margaret's constant criticism, but it still stung. The tiny creature in my arms had been found abandoned in a storm drain, and I couldn't just leave him there. This was my 20th foster animal this year, and each one had faced the same disapproval from my mother-in-law. We shared the large family property. David and I lived in the guest house while his parents occupied the main house. It was meant to be temporary, just until we saved enough for our own place. But the arrangement stretched on when David lost his job last year. Now, every rescue animal I brought home was scrutinized and criticized as another sign of my unsuitability for their family. Emily, Margaret called out, her heels clicking against the pavement as she approached. I thought we discussed this. No more strays. What will the neighbors think? The Hendersons already asked if we're running an illegal shelter. I turned to face her, noting how her perfectly styled hair and designer outfit contrasted sharply with my muddy jeans and rain-soaked jacket. He was dying, Margaret. The shelter's full, and he needs medical attention before he can be adopted. She wrinkled her nose, eyeing the puppy with disdain. And I suppose you'll be using your grocery money to pay for his treatment? Really, Emily, this obsession with broken animals has to stop. You're embarrassing the family. The puppy whimpered, and I instinctively pulled him closer. They're not broken, they are healing. And yes, I'll pay for his treatment myself. I have savings. Savings that should be going toward moving out of our guest house. She snapped. David deserves better than a wife who wastes money on lost causes. The mention of David made my heart ache. My husband tried to support my rescue work, but lately, the strain of his mother's disapproval had been wearing him down. Just last night, he'd suggested I take a break from fostering, at least until we got back on our feet. I carried the puppy toward the guest house, trying to ignore Margaret's continued criticism. Inside, I had transformed our spare room into a recovery space for rescued animals. Currently, it housed 2 cats recovering from surgery and an elderly dog with arthritis. Each one had a story. Each one needed someone to believe in them. As I settled the new puppy into a warm blanket, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the local animal rescue where I volunteered. Emergency case coming in. Senior dog, owner passed away. Need experienced foster ASAP. I glanced at the trembling puppy, then at the other animals resting peacefully in their beds. My heart said yes, but Margaret's words echoed in my mind. Was I really jeopardizing my marriage for these animals? Before I could respond, I heard David's car pull up. Through the window, I watched as Margaret rushed to meet him, no doubt ready to report my latest transgression. I saw her gesturing toward our house, her face animated with disapproval. David walked in a few minutes later, his expression tired. Mom told me about the new puppy, he said, loosening his tie. Emily, honey, maybe she has a point. We can't save them all. I stood up from where I'd been monitoring the puppy's temperature. I'm not trying to save them all, David. Just the ones I can. This little guy wouldn't have survived another night in that drain. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I knew meant he was stressed. I know your heart's in the right place, but we need to think about our future. Mom's been talking about selling the property, and we need to save for our own place. The news hit me like a physical blow. Selling the property? Where would we go? More importantly, where would I keep the animals I fostered? I've been applying for jobs, I said quietly, and most of the medical expenses are covered by the rescue organization. I just provide the care and space. David sat down heavily on the couch. It's not just about the money, Mom's right. What do people think when they see our home filled with sick animals? How does that reflect on our family? I looked around at the peaceful faces of the animals in my care. Each one had shown remarkable progress. Each one had a fighting spirit that amazed me. How could caring for these creatures be something to be ashamed of? Your mother doesn't see what I see, I said finally. These animals aren't broken or embarrassing. They're survivors. And sometimes, all they need is someone to give them a chance. David stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the main house where his mother lived. Just, promise me you'll think about taking a break? For us? I didn't answer immediately. The puppy had finally fallen asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling steadily. The message about the senior dog still waited on my phone, unanswered. Everything I believed in, everything I had worked for, was being challenged. But as I watched the peaceful animals around me, I knew I couldn't just stop. These creatures needed someone in their corner, someone who saw their worth beyond their current circumstances, even if that someone was just the family embarrassment who lived in the guest house. I reached for my phone, ready to respond to the rescue's message. Sometimes doing the right thing meant standing your ground, even when everyone else thought you were wrong. I just hoped David would understand. Little did I know, events were about to unfold that would change everything, especially Margaret's perspective on my embarrassing passion for helping animals. 2 weeks after the puppy incident, I sat in my makeshift animal recovery room, checking on my latest rescue, the senior dog I'd agreed to foster. His name was Duke, a gentle German shepherd whose owner had passed away. Despite Margaret's vocal disapproval, I couldn't turn him away. That morning started like any other, with Margaret's pointed comments during her routine inspection of the property. But something was different about her. She seemed distracted, almost anxious, clutching a letter in her perfectly manicured hands. Emily, she called through the screen door, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. Is that dog good with people? I looked up, surprised by the question. Margaret had never shown interest in any of my fosters before. Duke? Yes, he's wonderful with everyone. He was a therapy dog before his owner passed away. She nodded absently, then turned and walked away without her usual criticism. I watched her go, puzzled by the strange interaction. Later that afternoon, David came home early, looking worried. He found me giving medication to one of the recovering cats. Mom got some news from her doctor today, he said quietly. She's been diagnosed with severe anxiety and depression. Her doctor recommended a therapy dog. I froze, the pieces suddenly clicking into place, her distracted behavior, the question about Duke, the letter she'd been holding. The thing is, David continued, there's a 6-month waiting list for certified therapy dogs. Mom's doctor says she needs support now. I know it's a lot to ask, but Duke has years of experience as a therapy dog. I finished softly, looking at the gentle shepherd dozing in the corner. He'd been with us for just 2 weeks, but his calm, loving nature was already evident. That evening, Margaret appeared at our door again, something I'd never seen her do voluntarily. Her perfectly composed facade had cracks in it, her hair slightly disheveled, her designer outfit replaced by a simple sweater and slacks. I understand, she said stiffly, that Duke was a therapy dog. I nodded, watching as Duke lifted his head, his ears perking up at the sound of her voice. Without prompting, he stood and walked over to her, gently pressing his nose against her hand. Margaret's breath caught. Her hand trembled as she hesitantly touched Duke's head. My doctor says I need. She couldn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Would you like to spend some time with him? I asked quietly. He's very good at listening. To my surprise, tears welled up in her eyes. For the first time since I'd known her, Margaret's perfect mask crumbled completely. She sank to her knees, and Duke immediately moved closer, offering his steady, unconditional presence. I slipped out quietly, giving them privacy. Through the window, I watched as my mother-in-law, the woman who had called me an embarrassment for caring about broken animals, wrapped her arms around Duke and finally let herself break down. Over the next few days, Margaret began visiting regularly. She would sit with Duke, sometimes talking softly to him, sometimes just sitting in silence with her hand in his fur. I noticed small changes. Her hands stopped shaking. Her breathing became steadier. Her eyes lost some of their haunted look. One afternoon, I found her in the recovery room, watching as I changed the bandages on the puppy we'd rescued from the storm drain. Instead of her usual disapproving comments, she asked quietly, "Does it hurt him?" "No," I explained, surprised by her interest. "He's healing well. See how the infection is clearing up." She moved closer, really looking at the puppy for the first time. You're good at this," she admitted reluctantly. "How did you learn?" "Years of volunteering at shelters," I said. "Every animal is different, but they all need the same basic things: patience, care, and someone to believe in them." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Duke's fur. "Like people," she finally whispered, so softly I almost missed it. I pretended not to notice the tears she quickly wiped away. Sometimes healing happened in small moments, in quiet revelations that didn't need acknowledgement. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. Margaret started asking questions about the other animals, learning their names and their stories. She began bringing over old blankets for their beds, then special treats she'd bought just in case they might need them. One day, I overheard her on the phone with a friend from the country club. "No, we're not running an illegal shelter," she said firmly. "My daughter-in-law operates a recovery space for animals in transition. It's quite remarkable, actually." I had to sit down, overwhelmed by her words, not just the defense of my work, but the fact that she had called me her daughter-in-law instead of David's wife for the first time ever. Duke continued to work his magic, both as a therapy dog for Margaret and as a bridge between us. Through him, she began to understand what I'd known all along: that sometimes helping others heal can heal something in ourselves too. 3 months after Duke entered our lives, our home felt completely different. Margaret's daily visits weren't just for Duke anymore. She took genuine interest in all the animals, even helping me clean cages and administer medication. The woman who once called my foster work embarrassing now proudly told her friends about each animal's progress. But the biggest surprise came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was teaching Margaret how to bottle feed a rescued kitten when she suddenly said, "I've been thinking about the property." My heart sank, remembering the talk about selling it. Before I could respond, she continued, "The old pool house, with some renovation, it could make an excellent recovery space for the animals. Better than cramming them into your guest house." I nearly dropped the bottle I was holding. "The pool house? But I thought you wanted us to move out." Margaret gently adjusted the kitten's position. "Actually, I've been speaking with your father-in-law. We think this work you do is important. The property's too big for just us anyway. And seeing how you've helped these animals. Helped me." She paused, blinking rapidly. "The pool house just needs some updating. George already called a contractor." I sat there stunned as she outlined their plans: proper medical stations, separate recovery areas, even a small office space. The pool house would become a legitimate animal recovery center, with me in charge. "But why?" I finally managed to ask. Margaret was quiet for a moment, stroking Duke's head where he lay beside her. "Because I was wrong," she said softly. "I called these animals broken, called you an embarrassment, but you showed me that healing isn't embarrassing, it's brave. These creatures you help, they're not broken. They're just waiting for someone to see their worth, like Duke did for me." Tears welled in my eyes as she continued. "Besides, the Henderson's daughter asked if she could volunteer here. Apparently, word has spread about the amazing work you do." 2 weeks later, I stood in the renovated pool house, barely recognizing it. Clean medical stations lined one wall, comfortable recovery areas filled the main space, and a small office held all my files and supplies. My little fostering operation had transformed into something I only dreamed about. David came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Mom's already talking about fundraising events," he chuckled. "I think she's more excited about this than you are." "I never thought," I started, but stopped as I saw Margaret approaching through the window, Duke faithfully by her side. She was carrying a large sign, and my heart caught when I read it. "Second Chance Recovery Center, where healing hearts find home." She had it professionally made, complete with a logo featuring a dog and cat silhouette. "Well?" she asked anxiously. "Is it too much?" The ladies at the club helped design it. I hugged her, something that would have been unthinkable just months ago. "It's perfect," I whispered. The contractor's adding a small apartment above the center, she added. So you can be close to the animals at night. The guest house just isn't practical anymore. Not with the number of rescues we'll be able to help now. The word rang in my ears. Not just my work anymore, but our family's mission. That evening, as I made my rounds checking on the animals, I found Margaret sitting with our newest rescue, a scared horse who'd been abandoned at a local stable. She was reading to him softly, something she'd learned could help calm anxious animals. You know, she said, not looking up from her book, I used to think you were bringing broken things into our home. But really, you were bringing healing. These animals, they're not just getting better, they're helping others heal too. I thought about Duke, still faithfully attending Margaret's therapy sessions, about the kitten we bottle-fed together, now adopted by a little girl who'd lost her mother, about all the lives touched and changed by what we did here. We're all healing together, I said softly. Margaret smiled, reaching for my hand. Yes, we are. And I'm so proud to have you as my daughter. Not daughter-in-law, daughter. As I looked around at our growing sanctuary, at the family we built, both human and animal, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes the things we think will embarrass or diminish us end up being the very things that make us whole. And sometimes the people who seem most opposed to our dreams end up being their strongest supporters. Duke trotted over, pressing against Margaret's side as she wiped away tears. He looked at me with wise eyes, as if to say he'd known all along how this would turn out. And maybe he had. After all, he'd helped heal not just Margaret's heart, but our entire family's understanding of what it meant to truly care for others. The family embarrassment had become the family's pride, and our home had become exactly what I'd always dreamed it could be, a place where healing hearts, both human and animal, found their way home. Well, I suppose this is adequate, my mother-in-law, Margaret, said, delicately placing her fork beside her barely touched plate of beef bourguignon. Though in our family, we typically serve something more refined. Her emphasis on our family made it clear that even after 7 years of marriage to her son, I still wasn't truly part of it. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and at 34, I'd spent nearly a decade trying to meet my mother-in-law's impossible standards. Tonight was just another Tuesday dinner, another attempt to bridge the gap between us, another failure. I think it's delicious, honey, my husband James said, reaching for seconds, but even his support couldn't erase the sting of Margaret's words or the way she now pushed food around her plate like a child avoiding vegetables. You know Olivia, James's cousin's wife, she made the most extraordinary coq au vin last week. The sauce was perfectly reduced, the mushrooms imported from France. Margaret paused, examining a piece of carrot as if it had personally offended her. But then, she trained at Le Cordon Bleu. Not everyone can achieve that level of sophistication. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to remind her that Olivia's perfectly reduced sauce had come from a jar. I'd seen the empty container in her recycling bin. But starting an argument wouldn't help. It never did. More wine, Margaret? I offered instead, reaching for the bottle. She covered her glass with her hand. No, thank you. I find this vintage a bit common. James, darling, you remember the wonderful Bordeaux we had at the club last week? That was a proper wine. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mom, please. But Margaret was on a roll now. You know, Sarah, if you're interested, I could recommend some cooking classes. Nothing too advanced, of course, just something to help you grasp the basics of proper cuisine. The community college offers some lovely beginner courses. I stood up, gathering plates with shaking hands. 7 years of these weekly dinners, 7 years of subtle jabs and not-so-subtle criticism. Each time I told myself it wouldn't hurt, and each time it did. In the kitchen, I could still hear Margaret's voice carrying from the dining room. James, sweetheart, I worry about you. A man in your position needs to maintain certain standards. The partners at your firm, they have expectations. I ran water in the sink, trying to drown out her words. James was a successful attorney, and according to Margaret, that meant everything in his life, including his wife, needed to reflect a certain image. An image I apparently couldn't live up to. Sarah? James's voice behind me made me jump. Mom's leaving. She has a headache. Of course she did. She always developed a mysterious ailment when served food that didn't meet her standards. I dried my hands and followed James to the door, plastering on a polite smile. Thank you for coming, Margaret, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. She air-kissed my cheek, her perfume overwhelming. Thank you for trying, dear. Oh, and about Thanksgiving next week, I think it's best if we host at our house. No need to strain yourself. After she left, James pulled me into a hug. I'm sorry about Mom, you know how she gets. I did know. But something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way she dismissed my cooking despite the hours I'd spent preparing it. Maybe it was the condescending offer of cooking classes, or maybe, just maybe, it was her assumption that she'd be hosting Thanksgiving again. I want to host Thanksgiving this year, I said suddenly, surprising even myself. James pulled back, looking concerned. Sarah, you know how Mom is about holidays. She's hosted Thanksgiving for 20 years. And every year we sit at her table while she reminds everyone that her turkey is award-winning, her cranberry sauce is made from berries she personally selected, and her pumpkin pie recipe has been in the family for generations. I took a deep breath. I want a chance, James, one chance to show I can do this. He hesitated, and I could see him mentally calculating his mother's reaction. Mom will be upset. Mom is always upset about something I do. At least this time, it'll be for something I choose. I met his eyes. I need this, James, please. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, but you know she'll be difficult about it. I smiled, already forming a plan. Oh, I'm counting on it. That night, after James fell asleep, I sat at our kitchen table with my grandmother's recipe box open in front of me. Margaret wasn't the only one with family recipes and traditions. My grandmother had been a chef at one of Chicago's finest restaurants in the 1960s, breaking barriers as one of the few women in professional kitchens at the time. She taught me everything she knew, not just about cooking, but about life. The secret, she used to say, isn't in the ingredients, it's in the love you put into the meal. But, she'd add with a wink, excellent ingredients certainly don't hurt. I opened my laptop and began to plan. If Margaret wanted sophistication, I'd give her sophistication, but it would be on my terms, blending my grandmother's cherished recipes with my own modern twists. I had 9 days until Thanksgiving. 9 days to prove that I belonged at this family's table. My phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. Darling, I've already ordered the turkey from that lovely farm in Vermont. No need to worry about it. We'll eat at 4, as always. I smiled, screenshotting the message to add to my collection. Let her think she was still in control. For once, I had a secret ingredient she wasn't expecting: determination. I opened my grandmother's most treasured recipe, the one she'd made me promise never to share. When the time is right, she'd said, you'll know when to use this. Looking at Margaret's text, I knew the time was now. Sorry, Margaret, I whispered to myself, but this Thanksgiving is going to be a little different. The next week was a whirlwind of preparation. I took 3 days off work, much to Margaret's vocal disapproval. Really, Sarah, in our family we believe in a strong work ethic. Every night after my shifts at the pediatric clinic, I tested recipes, perfecting each element of the meal. Margaret's attempts to undermine me were relentless. First came the daily calls to James. Darling, are you sure Sarah can handle this? Remember the disaster at Easter with that overcooked ham? Then the helpful suggestions. I could send over my caterer's number. No shame in admitting you need help, dear. But her crowning move came 3 days before Thanksgiving when she showed up unannounced at our door. Sarah, dear, she said, breezing past me into the kitchen with a large shopping bag. I brought a few essential items. Can't have Thanksgiving without proper serving pieces. She began unpacking, each item a subtle criticism. Crystal gravy boat, much more elegant than that ceramic one you have. Proper silver serving spoons, I noticed yours are rather basic. Oh, and proper wine glasses. Those everyday ones simply won't do. I watched her arrange her items on my counter, each placement precise and pointed. Thank you, Margaret, but I've already planned everything. She paused, examining a water spot on one of my existing wine glasses. Have you? Because I took the liberty of checking your grocery delivery order. James gave me the password, hope you don't mind, and I noticed some concerning choices. Frozen pearl onions, store-bought stock. In our family, I haven't placed my grocery order yet. I cut in, my voice steady despite my racing heart. It was a lie. I placed the order weeks ago, using a different account she didn't know about. Oh, she seemed momentarily thrown off but recovered quickly. Well, I'll send you my supplier list. They're quite exclusive, but I'm sure they'll make an exception if you mention my name. After she left, I surveyed my kitchen. Her crystal and silver gleamed accusingly among my carefully chosen items. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was in over my head. Then I noticed she'd moved my grandmother's recipe box to make room for her serving pieces. I picked it up, running my fingers over the worn edges. Inside was everything I needed, not just recipes, but strength. My grandmother had faced far worse than a critical mother-in-law, and she'd done it with grace and skill. The next morning, my real grocery delivery arrived, not from Margaret's exclusive suppliers, but from small local farms and markets I'd carefully sourced. The turkey had been raised on a family farm just outside the city. The vegetables were from the farmer's market, where I'd built relationships with vendors over years of early morning shopping. The spices came from a tiny shop owned by an elderly couple who taught me about blending flavors. I began my preparations in earnest. The turkey needed 3 days of careful brining in my grandmother's secret mixture. The cranberry sauce required time to develop its complex flavors. Each element was planned with precision, each recipe tested and perfected. Margaret called twice more that day. The first time was to remind me about place settings. The Crawfords will be joining us. They're very particular about proper table settings. The second was to express concern about my chosen menu. Are you sure you want to attempt something so ambitious? I let her words wash over me, focusing instead on the task at hand. My hands moved with confidence, muscle memory from years of cooking alongside my grandmother taking over. The kitchen filled with aromas that transported me back to childhood holidays, watching my grandmother work her magic. The day before Thanksgiving, my sister Katie came over to help. She took one look at my detailed preparation lists and whistled. "You're really going all out, sis. Is this about proving something to Her Majesty?" I smiled, up to my elbows in herb butter for the turkey. "No, it's about proving something to myself." Katie nodded, understanding in her eyes. She'd been there through all of Margaret's criticisms, all the subtle digs and not-so-subtle dismissals. Well, let's show her what the Williams women can do. We worked through the evening, preparing everything that could be done ahead. The pies were baked, not just pumpkin, but my grandmother's secret maple bourbon pecan and a spiced apple that had won ribbons at county fairs. The cranberry sauce was perfect, the stuffing was prepped, and the turkey was ready for its final preparations. Around midnight, another text from Margaret. "Darling, don't forget to set the table tonight. These things take time to do properly. I can come over early to rearrange if needed." I looked at my dining room where the table was already set, but not with Margaret's crystal and silver. Instead, I'd used my grandmother's china, simple, elegant pieces that told a story of family dinners and holiday gatherings. Each plate held memories of laughter and love, of lessons learned in that Chicago kitchen. The centerpiece wasn't some elaborate floral arrangement from Margaret's preferred florist. Instead, handmade wreaths of fresh herbs and dried flowers created a runner down the table's center, their subtle fragrance filling the room. Candles in my grandmother's old holders would provide warm light, and at each place setting, a small card waited to share the story behind each dish. Katie wrapped an arm around my shoulders, surveying our work. "Think she'll appreciate any of this?" I thought about Margaret's likely reaction, the raised eyebrows, the subtle sighs, the careful selection of criticisms wrapped in politeness. Probably not. But for the first time, I don't care. This isn't about her anymore. After Katie left, I sat alone in my dining room, surrounded by the results of our hard work. Tomorrow would either be a triumph or a disaster, but either way, it would be mine. I picked up my phone and typed a response to Margaret. "Everything is ready. Dinner will be served at 3. Can't wait to share it with the family." Then I added something I'd never dared before. "And Margaret, please leave the crystal at home. We have everything we need." Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and crisp. I was up before sunrise, moving through my kitchen with quiet confidence. The turkey went into the oven at precisely 10 a.m., already fragrant with herbs and my grandmother's special butter blend. Each dish came together exactly as planned, years of practice guiding my hands. At 2:45, James peeked into the kitchen. "Mom just texted. They're 5 minutes away." He paused, taking in the array of dishes. "Sarah, this looks incredible." "Thanks." I wiped my hands on my apron, the one my grandmother had given me, now splattered with the evidence of a morning's work. "Could you light the candles?" Margaret's arrival was heralded by the click of heels on our front walk. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dress, and opened the door before she could ring the bell. "Welcome," I said, genuinely smiling. "Happy Thanksgiving." She stood there, arms full of what appeared to be serving dishes, looking slightly thrown by my calm demeanor. Behind her, my father-in-law, Robert, offered an apologetic shrug. "Sarah, dear," Margaret started, trying to step inside with her dishes. "I brought a few backup options just in case." "That won't be necessary," I said firmly, not moving from the doorway. "The meal is prepared and ready to be served. But thank you for thinking of us." For perhaps the first time in our relationship, Margaret was speechless. She allowed Robert to take the dishes back to their car while I led her into the dining room. The table was a vision. Candlelight danced off the polished surfaces of my grandmother's china. The herb garlands filled the air with a subtle fragrance, and the place cards told silent stories of family history. Margaret stopped short, her carefully maintained composure slipping for just a moment. "This is," she began, then faltered. "Different from what you expected," I suggested gently. Other guests began arriving. James's sister Emily and her husband, the Crawfords, some family friends. Each one paused in the dining room doorway, taking in the scene. The comments started flowing. "Beautiful. So elegant. What amazing attention to detail." When I brought out the turkey, golden brown and perfumed with herbs, even Margaret couldn't find fault. The carved slices were moist and tender, exactly as my grandmother had taught me. Each side dish told its own story. The green beans with toasted almonds and preserved lemon, the sweet potatoes with a maple bourbon glaze, the stuffing rich with fresh herbs and wild mushrooms. "Sarah," Emily said after her first bite, "this is incredible. Where did you learn to cook like this?" I noticed Margaret watching intently as I answered. "From my grandmother. She was the head chef at the Drake in Chicago back in the 60s. Everything I know about cooking, about hosting, about making people feel welcome at a table, I learned from her." "The Drake?" Margaret's voice was quiet. "In Chicago?" I nodded, serving more gravy to Robert. "Yes, she was one of the first women to run a high-end kitchen in the city. She always said food was about more than just ingredients. It was about bringing people together, about creating memories." Margaret was silent for a long moment, pushing food around her plate. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. "I ate there once, in the 70s. It was one of the finest meals I've ever had." The conversation flowed. The wine was perfect, not from Margaret's supplier, but from a small vineyard I'd discovered. And when dessert was served, there were audible gasps of delight. "Is this your grandmother's maple bourbon pecan pie?" Robert asked, taking another bite. "It's extraordinary." "It is." I smiled. The recipe won her a James Beard Award in 1975. Margaret's fork clattered against her plate. "Your grandmother was Eleanor Williams." The table fell silent as I nodded. "Eleanor Williams was a legend in Chicago dining," Margaret said, her voice different now. "I tried for years to replicate her pie recipe. No one ever came close." She looked down at her plate, then back at me, really seeing me, perhaps for the first time. "And you learned from her?" "Everything I know," I said simply, "including how to host a proper family dinner." The rest of the meal passed in a blur of conversation and laughter. As guests began to leave, each one thanked me with genuine warmth. The Crawfords, who, according to Margaret, were so particular, asked for my card, hoping to get my help planning their next dinner party. Finally, only Margaret and Robert remained. She lingered in the dining room while Robert helped James clear plates. "Sarah," she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I believe I owe you an apology." I turned from where I was carefully wrapping leftover turkey. "I've been difficult," she continued. "I thought I knew what proper meant, what sophistication looked like. But this meal, this evening, it wasn't just about the food, was it?" "No," I agreed. "It was about family, about tradition, about honoring the people who taught us and the memories we create together." She nodded slowly. "Your grandmother taught you well, not just about cooking, but about grace." She paused. "I don't suppose, would you consider teaching me some of her recipes?" I smiled, thinking of my grandmother's words about knowing when the time was right. "I'd like that, Margaret, though some recipes might have to remain family secrets." Of course, she said, then added with a small smile, but aren't we family? As they left, Margaret hugged me, a real hug, not her usual air kiss. Thank you, she whispered, for showing me what I've been missing. Later that night, as James and I sat in our quiet house, he squeezed my hand. You did it, honey. You actually did it. I looked at my grandmother's recipe box, sitting proudly on our kitchen counter. No, I corrected him, we did it. All of us. That's what family is supposed to be about. The next morning, I received a text from Margaret. Thank you for a lovely Thanksgiving. Perhaps next week's dinner could be at our house. I'd love to learn more about your grandmother's cooking techniques. I smiled, typing my reply. I'll bring the recipes, and Margaret, thank you for being willing to learn something new. Sometimes the greatest traditions aren't the ones we inherit, but the ones we create together. My grandmother had known that all along. No, Lisa, I've already told you. Today isn't a good day for swimming. Amanda's voice dripped with fake sweetness through the phone. James and Sophie need their private swim time. You understand, right? Maybe try the public pool. I gripped my phone tighter, watching my kids' faces fall as they heard their aunt's rejection yet again. It was the hottest day of the summer, and my twins, Lily and Lucas, both 7, had been begging to use the family pool all week. Amanda, it's 95 degrees, I said, trying to keep my voice level. The public pool is packed, and the kids haven't been able to swim at your house all summer. They're your niece and nephew. Well, if you taught them to be quieter, maybe they could come more often. James and Sophie need their peace and quiet. They're training for the junior swim team, you know. Of course I knew. It was all Amanda ever talked about, how her precious 12-year-olds were future Olympic champions who couldn't be disturbed by their younger cousins splashing. I hung up and turned to my disappointed twins. Lily's lower lip trembled while Lucas kicked at the ground, both still in the swimsuits they'd hopefully put on that morning. I'm sorry, sweethearts, I said, pulling them close. How about we get some ice cream instead? It's not fair, Mom, Lucas mumbled into my shirt. Why doesn't Aunt Amanda like us? My heart broke a little. This wasn't the first time Amanda had excluded my children, but seeing their hurt faces never got easier. Since moving into her new house with the giant pool last year, she turned what should have been a fun family gathering spot into her personal kingdom. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I sat on our back porch staring at our large yard. My husband, Mike, found me there, 2 glasses of wine in hand. Rough day, he asked, settling beside me. Amanda rejected us again. I sighed, accepting the wine. I just don't understand it, Mike. When did she become so exclusive? We all grew up swimming in that pool at Mom and Dad's old house. Now she acts like it's some elite country club. Mike took a thoughtful sip. You know, I've been thinking. This yard is pretty big. I turned to look at him, raising an eyebrow. What are you suggesting? Well, he grinned. I may have been doing some research. Above-ground pools have come a long way. And with my construction background, we could build something really special. Not just for us, but maybe what? Maybe for other families too. I've noticed we're not the only ones Amanda's excluded. Remember Sarah from down the street? Her kids aren't welcome either. Neither are the Thompsons twins. I sat up straighter, ideas beginning to form. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? A community pool. Nothing too fancy, but somewhere all the kids could swim. We could make it safe, supervised, inclusive. I looked around our yard with new eyes. The space that had always seemed a bit too big to maintain suddenly felt full of possibility. It would be a lot of work, I mused, and expensive. I've got some savings, Mike said. And I bet if we reach out to other families, they'd be willing to help. We could create something really special here, Lisa. Something that brings people together instead of pushing them apart. As we sat there planning, I felt excitement building. This could be more than just a pool. It could be a statement about the kind of community we wanted to create. The next morning, I started making calls. Sarah was immediately enthusiastic, offering to help with permits and paperwork since she worked at City Hall. The Thompsons, both teachers, volunteered to organize a schedule and safety protocols. Other neighbors offered supplies, labor, and funds. Within weeks, our backyard transformation was underway. Mike led the construction, teaching willing neighbors basic building skills as they worked. Our yard became a hub of activity, with people stopping by daily to help or just check on the progress. The kids were fascinated by it all. Lily and Lucas appointed themselves official construction helpers. proudly wearing the tiny hard hats Mike got them. They spent hours watching the pool take shape, their disappointment over Amanda's rejection gradually replaced by excitement for what was coming. One Saturday morning, as volunteers worked on the decking, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Lisa, what's going on here?" I turned to find my mother standing there, looking confused. News of our project obviously hadn't reached her yet. "Hi, Mom," I said, straightening up from where I'd been staining boards. "We're building a pool. A community pool, actually, for everyone's kids to enjoy." She looked around, taking in the busy scene, neighbors working together, kids playing nearby, the sense of community that had already started forming. "But why? You know Amanda has a perfectly good pool." "Does she?" I asked quietly, because from where I stand, having a pool that excludes family isn't perfectly good at all. Mom fell silent, watching as Lily and Lucas ran past with lemonade for the workers, beaming with pride at their contribution. "They look happy," she finally said. "They are. This is about more than just swimming, Mom. It's about creating a place where everyone feels welcome, where no child has to feel rejected or left out." As I watched understanding dawn in her eyes, I knew this project was already accomplishing exactly what we'd hoped. It wasn't just about building a pool. It was about building connections, breaking down walls, and showing our children what real family values looked like. And this was just the beginning. The community pool project continued to grow in ways I never expected. What started as a response to Amanda's exclusion had blossomed into something truly remarkable. Every weekend, more neighbors showed up to help, bringing their skills, supplies, and enthusiasm. One morning, I was reviewing safety equipment orders when Sarah rushed over, practically bouncing with excitement. "Lisa, you won't believe what just happened." I was at City Hall processing our pool permits, and the Parks and Recreation Director overheard me talking about the project. "He loves the idea. They want to feature us in the community newsletter as an example of neighborhood unity." I smiled, thinking how different this was from Amanda's exclusive approach. Our pool wasn't even finished yet, and it was already bringing people together. The physical transformation of our backyard was stunning. Mike's design included a large L-shaped pool with a shallow end perfect for younger kids. The surrounding deck was spacious enough for families to set up chairs and umbrellas. We added storage cubbies for pool toys and safety equipment, and the Thompsons organized a schedule of parent volunteers for supervision. Lily and Lucas had become the unofficial welcoming committee for the project. They set up a little stand where they served lemonade to the workers and kept a progress journal with photos and notes about each day's achievements. "Mom, look," Lily called one afternoon, holding up their journal. "We got 10 more signatures today. That's 30 families who want to join our pool club." The pool club was their term for the informal community group we'd formed to manage the pool. Unlike Amanda's exclusive approach, our only requirements were following safety rules and taking turns helping with maintenance. But not everyone was thrilled with our project. One evening, as Mike and I were reviewing the final touches needed before filling the pool, we heard the unmistakable sound of Amanda's SUV pulling into our driveway. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, marching into our backyard without invitation. "Mom told me about this public swimming hole you're building. Do you have any idea how this makes me look?" I took a deep breath, determined to stay calm. "How it makes you look? I'm not sure what you mean, Amanda." "Don't play innocent," she snapped. "You're doing this to spite me, aren't you? Because I wouldn't let your kids disturb James and Sophie's training." Before I could respond, a small voice piped up from behind me. "That's not true, Aunt Amanda." We turned to see Lucas standing there, his progress journal clutched to his chest. "We're building this pool so everyone can swim together. Nobody gets left out here." Amanda's face flushed. "Left out? My children aren't left out. They're elite athletes. They need their space, they're quiet. You wouldn't understand." "Actually," Mike said, joining us, "I think Lucas understands perfectly. This pool isn't about excluding anyone. Even James and Sophie are welcome to swim here. The difference is, they'll need to share the space and respect others, just like everyone else." Amanda's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Finally, she turned on her heel and stormed back to her car, leaving a tense silence in her wake. Later that night, I found Lily and Lucas sitting on the edge of the unfinished deck, their legs dangling. "Are you okay?" I asked, settling between them. I knew that wasn't easy, hearing Aunt Amanda talk like that. "We're okay, Mom," Lily said, leaning against me. "Actually, we feel kind of sorry for James and Sophie." "You do?" Lucas nodded. "Yeah, they never get to just have fun swimming anymore. Everything's always about training and being quiet and being elite. That sounds boring." I hugged them close, marveling at their wisdom. They were right. Amanda's pursuit of exclusivity and perfection was robbing her own children of the simple joy of playing in the water with friends. The next few days were a flurry of activity as we prepared for the pool's grand opening. The Parks and Recreation Department sent a photographer to document the community project. Local businesses, hearing about our initiative, donated pool toys and safety equipment. Even the ice cream truck driver asked if he could include our pool in his regular route. The night before the opening, I stood in our transformed backyard, taking it all in. The pool was filled, its water gleaming under the security lights. The deck was finished, dotted with colorful umbrellas and chairs. Safety rules were clearly posted, emergency equipment was in place, and the schedule board showed 3 months of volunteer slots already filled. Mike wrapped his arms around me from behind. "Proud of what we've created." "More than proud," I replied, leaning back against him. "I just keep thinking about what Lily and Lucas said about James and Sophie. Maybe this will show Amanda there's a better way." Maybe, he agreed. "But even if it doesn't, we've still done something amazing here. Look at how many families have come together because of this project." He was right. What had started as a response to rejection had grown into something far more meaningful. We'd built more than just a pool, we'd built a community. As we headed inside, I noticed a small figure standing at our front gate. It was Sophie, Amanda's daughter, watching the pool with longing eyes. When she saw me notice her, she quickly turned and ran away, but not before I caught the wistful expression on her face. Tomorrow's opening day would be interesting indeed. Opening day dawned bright and warm. Perfect swimming weather. By 9 in the morning, families were already arriving, kids bouncing with excitement as their parents helped set up chairs and umbrellas around the deck. Lily and Lucas proudly handed out pool passes, simple laminated cards they'd helped design with names, emergency contacts, and basic safety rules. The joy on their faces as they welcomed everyone made my heart swell. "Mom," Lily called out suddenly, "look who's here." I turned to see my mother walking through the gate, looking somewhat uncertain. But she wasn't alone. Behind her, trying to appear invisible, were James and Sophie. "The kids begged to come," Mom explained quietly when she reached me. "Amanda's at a swim meet consultation and, well, I thought maybe just this once." I knelt down to James and Sophie's level. They stood awkwardly in their matching team swimsuits, looking both eager and nervous. "You're always welcome here," I said warmly. "The only rules are, be safe and have fun. Think you can manage that?" They nodded enthusiastically, and I noticed Sophie clutching a regular pool toy, something I'd never seen her with before. Usually she only had training equipment. Can we just play?" James asked hesitantly, as if expecting the answer to be no. "That's exactly what this pool is for." I smiled, watching their faces light up. Within minutes they were in the water, splashing with Lily, Lucas, and the other kids. For the first time, I saw them just being children. No pressure, no performance expectations, just pure joy. The morning flew by in a blur of laughter, splashing, and community spirit. Parents took turns monitoring the pool while others organized games and activities. The ice cream truck's familiar jingle drew everyone out for a brief treat break, creating an impromptu poolside party. Then, around noon, a hush fell over the crowd. Amanda stood at the gate, her face unreadable as she took in the scene, especially her children playing Marco Polo with their cousins and new friends. I walked over, preparing for another confrontation, but before I could speak, Sophie's voice rang out across the pool. "Mom, come watch me. I learned how to do a handstand underwater." Something shifted in Amanda's expression as she watched Sophie demonstrate her new skill. Not perfect, not competition-worthy, but performed with pure happiness. "I haven't seen her smile like that in months," Amanda said quietly, almost to herself. "They're still great swimmers," I offered gently, "but they're also kids who deserve to have fun sometimes." Amanda was quiet for a long moment, watching James join a game of volleyball while Sophie taught Lily her handstand technique. She began, then stopped. I thought I was doing the right thing, pushing them to excel. But looking at them now, She turned to me, her eyes glistening. I've been horrible, haven't I? To them, to you, to everyone. Not horrible, I corrected. Just maybe a little lost in the pursuit of perfection. But it's never too late to change course. As if on cue, both James and Sophie called out, "Mom, come swim with us." Amanda hesitated, looking down at her designer outfit. I held out one of the spare swimsuits we kept on hand for guests. "What do you say, sis? Ready to remember what it's like to just have fun in the water?" To my surprise, and everyone else's, she took the swimsuit and disappeared into the changing room. When she emerged, she looked younger somehow, less rigid, and when she joined her kids in the pool, their delighted laughter seemed to wash away years of tension. By the end of the day, as families began packing up and heading home, Amanda pulled me aside. "I don't suppose," she started, then squared her shoulders and continued, "I don't suppose you could use another parent volunteer on the schedule. Maybe we could coordinate some basic swim lessons for the younger kids." I smiled and handed her a sign-up sheet. "Welcome to the community, Amanda." That evening, as Mike and I sat on our deck, watching the sunset reflect off the quiet pool water, I thought about how sometimes the best response to exclusion isn't to fight back, but to build something better, something that brings people together instead of pushing them apart. "Mom." Lily and Lucas appeared in their pajamas. "Can we have our bedtime story out here tonight?" "Of course," I said, hiding the space between us. As they snuggled in, Lucas asked, "Do you think Aunt Amanda will really help with swim lessons?" "I think," I replied, watching the last rays of sun sparkle on the water, "that when you build bridges instead of walls, amazing things can happen." And in the gentle evening breeze, with my family close and the sound of distant children's laughter still echoing in my memory, I knew we'd created something truly special, not just a pool, but a place where family meant including everyone, where community meant supporting each other, and where the simple joy of swimming could bring out the best in all of us.